So to get started with our second part of the Ultimate Workshop for Business Owners, Taxes, Succession, and Estate Planning, I'm Bill Hesch, and we're going to talk about the top 10 succession planning mistakes that business owners make. If you go to your outline, there's an outline in here that again, this is intended to be a workshop. You'll see that there's yes or no or not applicable. The idea is, as a business owner, these are the 10 common mistakes that business owners make in succession planning, and it may be something that you would want to identify that you need to follow up when you go back and work with your attorney, your CPA, your financial advisor, that these are the common mistakes I think that are made by business owners. And that the other thing I would mention too is that there will be an Exhibit A attached. And I would comment on the Exhibit A because I look at what I've tried to do with the attachment is to identify tools. I'm trying to look at these. This is a workshop. We're here to try to identify what do you need to work on in your business with succession planning. And you're going to find that there's 15 pages at the back of the outline. Page 1 is the beginning of basically a business owner, key person, disability checklist. And again, that's something you can go back and work on. So I'm trying to give you some materials that's just beyond. We don't have time to cover everything. But it's intended for you to be able to go back in your home or your office and be able to answer some questions. I think that gets back to what I said to lead off, that the key is to ask the right questions when you're doing whatever planning you're doing, tax planning, succession planning, estate planning. We got to ask the right questions. Also, you'll find that I have an outline of the secrets for a successful business succession plan. It's a 2-page outline. That summarizes the article that is right behind it on page 8 that was published back in 1990 when I was a tax partner at Deloitte & Touche, when I talked about family business succession planning. So that kind of summarizes the whole process that I use for business owners when you're trying to do the succession planning for their retirement, their potential death or disability. Behind that are individual parts of questions that I use as a follow-up with key people, with family members, and those are things I developed back in 30 years ago. It's simple, but on pages 10 through 15, you'll see the questions I would want key people to answer, the questions I would want family members to answer that are involved in the business. And it's a tool that I use that basically facilitates then everyone answering those questions, and then you can identify what everybody's position is. I've actually acted as a facilitator with business owners, and I can share this with you. A lot of times, the children of a business owner are not inclined to tell mom or dad, the business owner, what they really feel. So I haven't worked in that capacity because they tend to tell mom or dad what mom or dad want to hear. Avoid the conflict. It's not worth it. So if you have a family business and you're doing succession planning, it's just from my experience. I've been involved in these meetings. And it also relates to key people. They can't be totally honest to a certain extent. So I'll cover some comments through the common mistakes and share some of my experiences with you. But this goes back, these outlines I developed, quite frankly, back in 30 years ago. I used them with Scory Food Service in 1986 with Charlie and his 4 sons, and went through these questions with them individually and collectively to come up with some succession planning with Charlie and his family business. That's the company I went into 5 years later, and I was their CFO for a couple years, and I've been involved in succession planning with Charlie. I was inside the company, and I was Dad's guy. So it's not unusual. My feelings were not hurt. I didn't go to lunch with the 4 sons. It's okay, you know. So I've been in that situation. I've been involved in being in business with my brother. It was Hesch and Hesch the first 2.5 years I was in business. We're still brothers. Okay. I moved down the hall, Carrie and Kathy and we're still brothers. 27 years ago, or no, 20 years ago. I had my son go to law school at Chase. He was clerking with Amy back 12 years ago or so, and was in law school, and he dropped out of law school after 2 years. So he was working part-time. He was doing a good job as a clerk, law clerk. After I said, well, you got a year to decide what you want to do, because, you know, it wouldn't be right, I don't feel, for him to not get his law degree. And he didn't want to do what I did anyway, I got to tell you. He wanted to be a litigator, and I don't do litigation. I don't go in a courtroom. I'm a planner. And so I had my son, and I had involved with my son in the business. And after a year and a half, he extended his contract for 6 months. He left. I had to terminate him. I had to go through that decision. So, you know, as a business owner with my brother and my son, I've walked in the shoes of business owners, so I have that personal experience in addition to working closely with family members, Charlie in particular, for 10 years. You know, Charlie had, you know, 2 sons, Chuck and John, and they were in charge of sales and operations, and we were talking about succession plan and everything, and the company sold out to a public company in 1996, 10 years. But it was interesting in the process. When we started out, the company was flat for 5 years. And this is common information. They went from a $25 million company to a $50 million company to a $100 million company in 10 years. So when they sold out, you know, it was a good decision for the family. They cashed in their marbles. Kind of interesting, though. You know, I've worked with a lot of business owners that have retired, and they're miserable. I actually had read that when you retire, if you don't replace your life purpose, you'll die in 6 years. Charlie died 6 years after he sold the company. I went through his agony. It was the worst thing he ever did. Didn't care about the money. I've had so many business owners I've worked with, it's about the game of life. It's serious business. And it's kind of like myself, you know. If God gives me the health, I'll die in a saddle, you know. Why not? I really enjoy the game. I enjoy helping people. I'm really at a unique stage of my life that I've got so much experience and education and knowledge and this and that, you know. It's fun. It's part of, you know, I'm helping families in their succession planning. I'm helping them. And I found with business owners, though, that you know, retirement is not an option until they can't do it anymore. So, you know, everybody's at a different stage. But I think I wanted to share with you that I've worked a lot with the family businesses and the succession planning, and it comes from the heart. That there's nothing more important, quite frankly, than the relationship between the owner, mom or dad, and the children that are active in the business. And there's children typically that are not in the business, and going through all those issues. Okay, we're going to be talking about that. So I want to have that as an introduction, that it really is pretty important. And for a lot of you that are not even close to retirement that are here, it's about disability planning. I had to deal with that last year. Some of these materials I developed, I did last year. It was in last year's seminar. Because last year I had back surgery in February. I had 2 knees being replaced. I didn't know how I was going to come out of that thing. And I had to put a succession plan in place. If something happened to me that, you know, Amy was going to take over and run the law firm and take care of the CPA practice. You know, we had a plan in place, and everybody knew what the plan was. Worked out all the financial details, too. You know, so, yeah, and that's something, too, that business owners don't plan for their financial security. A lot of business owners, I got to tell you, the business is your financial security. That's not uncommon. You know, you're all in. You're growing that business. Everything you got goes into the business. You're not trying to put money away in the stock market. You're trying to grow your business, and you're trying to, you know, develop and get bigger and better. And so that's something that, you know, I think is just that, you know, you really have to work hard and be really focused, and you try to do what you can to make sure the business is successful in spite of all the problems you got. And that's the thing I can guarantee you. I can guarantee you you're going to have problems. I do not know a business owner, I do not know a family that doesn't have problems. If they don't admit it, then their head's in the sand and they're hiding it from everybody. So that's just part of life. We're human. You will have problems. You got to prepare, and you don't know where they're going to come from. So let's talk about the top 10 succession planning mistakes that business owners make. Succession planning mistake number 1, The failure to communicate with family members in business and key employees to find out what future role they want in the business. You know, there are 3 keys to a successful business succession plan. Number 1, communication. Number 2, communication. Number 3, communication. That's what it's all about. That's my article, you'll see. It's all about communication. Families do not communicate. Ozzie and Harriet and the normal family does not exist. Families are very dysfunctional in how they communicate. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever else, but I've been involved in those family situations, and they do not communicate. It's too often that the children are relating to mom or dad, the business owner, what they want to hear. And the children are getting treated by mom and dad the same way they were when they were 13 years old. It doesn't change. You can't change those old habits. And the preconceptions that family members, that the parents had of their children doesn't change. It's really hard to overcome those barriers. So it's important to know if a family member wants to become president of the company, wants control of the company, which family members do. And that you need to put a roadmap together that basically you want input from everybody. I think you got to start with the family first, because that really undoes everything. If you go around and you don't really get your ducks in a row with your family, they're going to sabotage things down the road with the key people. So I always try to focus on the family first and then the key employees to try to identify, you know, who's going to be part of the succession team. And I look at it from this perspective. Say, I'm not going to retire. Well, if you become disabled, what's going to happen? You have a car wreck, what's going to happen? This stuff happens. You get a stroke. Gosh. One of my best friends from high school, 64 years old, biking 50 miles a week, had a stroke. Doctor. He's still in rehab today. Happened 3 months ago. Half side of his body is paralyzed still. This stuff happens. It's scary. So I'm just trying to encourage you to focus on communicating with your family and your key members. That's the biggest mistake. That's the starting point. Okay. The succession planning mistake number 2. Failure to identify key responsibilities for all key people and for the person who become president upon the owner's death or disability. So again, we try to identify that the president, the owner of the company, is doing certain things. They don't talk to their kids about what they're doing. If something happens, the business suffers, quite frankly, if you don't do this planning. Your employees suffer because you don't do this planning. So in the outline on the checklist that I have on the first couple pages, I have an opportunity where you can outline each person's responsibilities and identify what each person's doing. It's important. Now, in my particular situation, I looked at it from a perspective that the things I do, typically professionally, with clients, I'm always taking an employee with me to a meeting. So there's continuity. If I'm sick or a car accident, things flow. Honestly, they do all the work anyway. I tell clients that. But that's how I leverage myself. I sit, I identify, discuss, come up with a plan, and then we move ahead and they execute it, and I'm overseeing it and I'm managing it, and we get it done. We try to create a sense of urgency. That's another thing I got to say that is typically one of the flaws of this whole process is there's no sense of urgency. You never get around to it. Okay. You know, it's interesting, you know, talk about planning your succession and making plans is like a roadmap, but you have your business, and people talk about this all the time with their business coaches. How many hours a week do you put in your business? Now, add it up for the whole year. How many hours a year do you put into your succession plan? If you died or became disabled, is your business protected? Have you communicated with your key people? Do they know if you don't show up to work because you're on the way to work, you have a car accident, and you're out for 2 weeks? Are they ready? And that's what this is important to identify, particularly the owner of the business. needs to identify their responsibilities so that they can communicate to their key people what's going on. Do they really know what you as an owner are currently working on? Do they really know what you're planning to do with the company a month from now, 2 months from now? Do they really know the things you got in motion? It's kind of interesting that with myself, with Amy and Kurt, it kind of evolved when Kurt came on board. We're going to lunch 2-3 times a week in us working meetings. We're strategizing everything. We do our marketing together. We talk about the workflow, the project work, what's going on, and we're talking about all kinds of things. So we really are having those meetings on a regular basis every week, talking about the business and everything. The CPA practice, which I manage with Carrie and Kathy, I'm working with them, but they, quite frankly, have been working with me for so many years. The clients are just working with them directly. That's how it works. And then they let me know if they need anything. That's how that works, So that's the number 2 mistake that is made by business owners in succession planning. The succession planning mistake number 3, the failure to put legal documents in place to allow key persons to take over new responsibilities and designate who will be president if the owner-president dies or becomes disabled. Every business has a legal structure. Some, you have already identified these things and the things are in place. Let's talk about the different types of legal structure that you have that your business may be structured as. It may just be a sole proprietorship. You're not a corporation. You're not a limited liability company. You have no asset protection, so to speak. And so who's going to run your business if you are just a sole proprietorship with no legal entity behind you? Who's going to run your business? The answer is the person that has your power of attorney, your financial power of attorney. A lot of times we'll do a springing power of attorney for people that says that when I'm disabled, the power of attorney springs into action. I've identified who's going to be running the business. Now, for some business owners, you may have key people working with you, and you may be married, and your spouse has your power of attorney, so all of a sudden you've identified your spouse is going to start running the company. And your spouse is going to tell your key people what to do. And if your spouse doesn't like what they do, what I'm trying to say to you, that may be the worst thing you could ever do. You may want to provide, depending upon your personal situation, that the spouse is going to handle your personal finances, but John or Mary is going to be involved taking over the business because they're key people. That's who the customers are working with. That's who the people that you work with, all the relationships you have. And that person's going to be having to make the decisions because you had a car accident and you're out for a month. So again, it's your power of attorney that you need to identify who's going to control the business if you die or become disabled, if you're a sole proprietorship. If you're a limited liability company, you can you're either member managed or manager managed. Now, a lot of people don't even know that. They're a limited liability company, and they don't know that that's not a tax entity, that a limited liability company can be anything. It can be, if you're one owner, you're a sole proprietorship. If there's 2 owners or more, there's a partnership. You can elect to be an S corporation, or you can elect to be a C corporation. So an LLC is not anything other than what you elect it to be. But it is recognized under state law. And so if you do not have an operating agreement, a written agreement identifying how the owners are going to operate the company, state law has provided that you are treated as a general partnership and any member can conduct business on behalf of the limited liability company. You are member managed. It's like you're a general partnership, and any partner can act on behalf of the company and do anything. You may not know that if you got 3 partners. That if you don't have an operating agreement designating a president of the company or a manager or something, then any partner can do anything they want, and under partnership law, you've obligated the business to that financial obligation. Okay? So you have to first determine whether you have an operating agreement or not, which you should know. If you don't, you're member managed. If you do have an operating agreement, and this is what Amy and I and Kurt do, we have a checklist we use to put together a good operating agreement. You can get that from us if you want to. If you don't have one, you need one, just contact us so we can give you that checklist. But if you're have an operating agreement, typically you're trying to provide, here's the president of the company, here's the vice president, and so you have a succession in line in place. That's like a corporation. So it gives you the same structure that you have in a corporation, except the corporation is a little bit different. I'll cover that next. But at least you're going to identify in the operating agreement who's going to be taking control of the company if something happens to the president, and how that's going to operate, and how, if you have more than one partner, how that's going to operate. If you have more than one partner. Is it going to be unanimous, or do you need, 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4, or, how are you going to handle this? That's part of your strategy when you start putting together a good operating agreement for your business. Let's talk about a corporation. Let's say you have a corporation that you own. Not a limited liability company, but you have stock in a corporation. You would have a power of attorney that if you own the stock in your name individually, whoever has control of your financial power of attorney will control the voting of your stock. So a corporation is set up that the shareholders of a company appoint a board of directors, typically annually. There's an annual meeting. And then those board of directors appoint a officer of the company. You have got to follow these corporate formalities. You've heard of piercing the corporate veil. If you don't follow those corporate formalities, you have personal liability potentially in a lawsuit for not operating the corporation properly using a shareholder meeting, a board of director meeting, and appointing officers. So you need to have those corporate minutes. And we'll provide those to you too. That's boilerplate stuff, quite frankly, but they need to be done annually, theoretically, to have liability protection. However, if you do some good estate planning and maybe you put your stock in your trust, we have our clients, we recommend a trust, and we'll be covering that in the third segment, estate planning. Then the trustee of the trust will have control of the stock. And the trustee of the trust then will be in control as a shareholder to appoint the board of directors, or to the board of directors then to appoint the officers of the company. What I would try to share with you is that I think you need to go through this process. You need to have the legal things in place, but you need to do the planning to direct whoever you put in charge what you want them to do. Now, keep in mind, they might choose to do something else. So it's a matter of trust sometimes, whether it's family member or key employee. So let's move on to the succession planning mistake number 4. The failure to provide development training for key persons to take on new roles and responsibilities if the owner president dies or becomes disabled. It takes different skills to be a president of a company, to be in charge of sales, to be in charge of operations. It takes different skills. A person may be great running your sales department, but they would be a horrible manager as a president of the company. You got to evaluate your team. And sometimes it may just be yourself and another partner. And it's not unusual for the outside person to handle the sales and the inside person to handle the operations. And the person that is maybe the operations person is the president of the company, managing all the workforce and the production and the delivery of your product and service. And you have a salesperson out there that doesn't know how to manage people, doesn't know how to oversee operations and make decisions that a president of a company would make. Doesn't know how to work with the bank for your cash flow plan and your finances. There's all kinds of responsibilities that the president of the company has. What I'm suggesting here is that if you identify the successor, particularly a family business where you have the children are wanting to step into the shoes. And I could use the Squarey family as an example. You had John in charge of warehousing operations. You had Chuck in charge of sales. So when we worked with them, we said one of the key things was they had 125 employees. If you want to be president of the company, who's going to take over sales when you step into Dad's shoes? If you want to be in charge of if you want to be president of the company, you're in charge of operations. Dad could die tomorrow. Who's going to be ready to step in and handle the operations? So it was really good dynamics. And also I kind of talked to him about, to convince your dad that you're the person to be president, why don't you be really good in what you do to convince your dad that you're the right choice for president? So that's what drove the growth of the company, quite frankly, when they were doubling their business and doubling their business in a 10-year period, quadrupling their business in 10 years. That they each started focusing on sales and warehousing operations, and the company exploded. It was an interesting concept. And that's part of my concept that I use in my discussion. And you see at the end of my article that I wrote, that I try to have the business owners start working with their family members on the business plan and making the company successful this year. Prove yourself to me. You want to, you try to identify what shoes you want to wear. If they need some training, we want to try to develop them. And then, by the way, show me you can really do something by your current job before you become president. It works. So it gets back to what's good for the company. I always raise that question when I was inside there, because that's something that gets in the mind sometimes, that sometimes you'll find both the business owner as well as the family members in the business are making decisions that are personal in nature, not right for the business. It's where they want to be personally, that they want to, that's their goal, but maybe it isn't right for the business because maybe they're not qualified. Maybe, and I'm not willing to throw them under the bus. I'm saying, well, go get some training, go get some experience. But by the way, show me that you can function in your current role and be very successful there to convince your business owner, mom or dad, that you're the person that should run this company. It works. Or quite frankly, sometimes it doesn't work. And what does that tell mom or dad? Okay? That's the proof of the pudding. In other words, you put them on the line and have some expectations and have them deliver. Okay? Succession planning mistake number 5, the failure of the owner-president to communicate with key persons the project's problems currently that they're working on, so to know what to do if they unexpectedly die or become disabled. So I did comment on that. A business owner is typically on an island. I got to tell you. They got all their plans up here and nobody knows. They keep their cards right here, up tight. Nobody knows. Okay? Maybe their spouse. But a lot of times the spouse is not involved in the business. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So I think it's important to have an idea, and that's what that worksheet's about, that's where I communicate with Amy and Kurt, that they know exactly what's going on and clients and plans. We're developing our marketing plans. We're doing this seminar, and we're going to be putting it out on Facebook and LinkedIn, different spots, so that people can go to our website to watch the whole seminar. And that's the other thing I'll share with you. Once Fred Williams here gets the video produced, we're going to be putting it on our website. You actually can go to our website and see the seminar we did 4 years ago. And it's a different seminar today. So that's kind of interesting. So there's actually a video presentation 4 years ago on taxes, succession, and estate planning that covers different topics, quite frankly. So it's kind of interesting. But that's part of our marketing plan that I work with Amy and Kurt on. Succession planning mistake number 6, the failure of the owner-president to lead the key persons in preparing a business plan for the coming year, as well as identify long-term goals for the company. Again, we get back to communication with the key people. So you kind of work together to see, you want to find out from your key people, what are their recommendations for the company to become more profitable? What are their recommendations? What should be done differently in the company? Get the input. Now, as a business owner, part of a management training, I got to tell you, if you ask for input, you should go out of your way to implement some of their ideas and not just say no, 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 no. That happened with me in Square Food Service. I went into the company saying, I was in charge of their accounting department. There were 10 people. I said, I like your ideas. What can we do differently to make the company operate more efficiently? After 1 month, I got 0 response. I met with each person individually then. I said, in your department, what can make your job better, easier, more efficient? They said, well, I made suggestions before, and nobody ever did anything. Well, I said, well, tell me, what would you do? So it's kind of interesting. I went into the accounts receivable. They said, every morning we make a copy of our checks, every morning. And then every afternoon we're posting the checks. Why are we making a copy of these checks and spending all this time? We just get the check in and post it on our accounts receivable. I go, that's a good idea. Why don't we start doing that? Well, I cut their time in half, and they had data processing to help them on credits because the ladies doing the accounts receivable didn't have time for that. So that freed up the data processing person so the accounts receivable people could efficiently record the income and not have to make a copy of a check. Accounts payable is the same thing. We spend all morning making a copy of the check, and then we write on the copy of the check how to code, or the invoice. We make a copy of the invoice. We write on then that copy what account it goes to, and then we post it. Okay? We had 2 people working there and a lady part-time, and she was going to retire. We thought we'd have to get a 3rd person in that department. They stopped making copies of the checks every morning, freed up the time, and when the lady retired, we didn't have to replace her. Your people have the answers. It's called empowerment. I've always believed in that. You go to the people that you work with, and they know what their job is involved, and they know where they're having problems. If you go to your people, that's where you're going to get your answers, how to make their job easier, more efficient. And you got to give them a benefit of the doubt. Sometimes they come up with off-the-wall ideas, and you can't just slam them and put them down or whatever. You have to be tactful. You have to work with them. But you have to try to implement something. Because I really believe that collaboratively, if you work with your team, you can get a better result. The succession planning mistake number 7, the failure of the business owner to make sure the business can continue its current level of profitability if the owner dies or becomes disabled. The problem I see here is that typically the whole business evolves around the business owner. And if the business owner becomes sick, car accident, dies suddenly, the business is in turmoil and lost. So I feel that you can review your organization chart. That's one of the things we talk about in there. And you could put it into place which people are going to be responsible for moving in which direction to take over different roles if something happens to one of your key people. And it isn't just the president of the company. It can be other key people. That you identify your key people, and that's important so that the business is okay and the business can get through an untimely death or disability of a key person by having a plan in place. Planning is the key. Communication is the key. And so I think that you can also anticipate the problems that you may have. You know your people. You know their strengths. You know your weaknesses. And I learned that a long time ago. Managing my business, my job is not to develop and train my people so they become this perfect worker. As a manager of a company, a manager of a business, my role is to identify where people's strengths and weaknesses are and put them in a role to succeed in everything that they do. Being very careful that if they have weaknesses, that I know how to back them up so they don't fall. They might need to be managed. So you try to put a process in place to make sure that when you're working with your key people, that you're able to, you know what they're going to, where they would drop the ball. And so I can evaluate Kurt, Amy, Carrie, Kathy, and I know how they work. My job is to make them successful in everything that they do. It's a win-win. I should add that, too. That's something I haven't commented on. I believe in win-win in life, no matter what aspect of the life, whether it's your employees, your customers, it has to be a win-win. That should be your focus. And if you do that, I think you're going to be doing well the rest of your career, whatever you're doing. Succession planning mistake number 8. The failure to minimize the tax consequences arising from a change of ownership from the owner's death or disability. See, there's always taxes out there, right? How are you going to transfer the ownership, whether to the family, or whether you're going to transfer ownership to key people, or whether you're going to sell the company to an outside company, a competitor, if something happens with the death or disability of a key person? I have one guy I consulted with. Again, I always tell you what happened last year because this stuff comes up all the time. He went out and got a lot of seed money, developed this company. I guess they have $10 million in sales. He's a part-time, he's a minority owner. He owns maybe 20% of the company, but he went out and got all this capital and got through the recession. He got some venture capital. They're wanting to cash him out. They want to sell the company. It's kind of interesting. 10 million in sales, and he's the only salesperson. How would that affect you if you were buying the company? Another client, a number of years ago, 80% of his business was with one bank. How would that affect you if you were going to buy the company? In fact, it was a $15 million deal, and the buyer backed out a week before the deal. The guy was devastated, couldn't take it emotionally. Thought he went the lottery, and he lost it, just like that. He was bankrupt 2 years later. I went out there to do an audit. He was in Arizona. He was from Cincinnati. I did an audit, IRS audit, because he was making too much money. They thought he was money laundering. He was making $3 million a year. That business went under when he lost his, because of then he didn't have attention to the business. The key person had stepped into his shoes, didn't care, and he went under. This stuff happens. This is why it's important in a succession plan. And I look at it not just typically for your family and yourself and your spouse or whoever, but also your employees. It's got to be a win-win. Okay. So when you do that, whatever plan you develop, you want to structure it in a way. What we normally try to do is we try to put the deal together. Then we try to say, how do we get the same result and get a better tax consequence? I'll give you an example. Client was selling his business for $10 million. I'm a tax guy, so I said, look, you got equipment on the books, you're a manufacturer, $6 million, but you've depreciated it. Your tax basis is $600,000. If you sell the company and the equipment is sold for $6 million, you have ordinary income. It costs you 20% more in tax. Say paying capital gains at 15%, you pay personal income tax rates at that time at 35%. So when you do the contract, you say, I'm going to sell the assets for their book value, $600,000. This is mutually agreed upon. That price is contingent on that. They signed the deal. Then the buyer's accountants looked at the deal and said, oh, my goodness, we don't get to write off those assets. We got to write off the goodwill over 15 years. We don't get a 5 or 7 year write-off for the equipment. The client held his ground, and he saved $1 million in taxes on the deal. That's where you do the tax planning. Sometimes people go forward and they don't work with their accountant, quite frankly, and they do it after the fact. And then they lose in the long run. So you want to make sure before you sign a contract, when you're in the period of negotiation, you should be considering the tax consequences if you're selling the company. It's very important to get some strategy there. The succession planning mistake number, where are we at? 9. The failure to identify changes in the organizational chart if key persons die or become disabled, or in future years if the owner-president plans to reduce their hours in the business. That's sometimes what happens with a business owner, that they're planning to, okay, well, why should I sell it? Why don't I just kind of work a few less hours? But when you do that, you have to have someone responsible starting to take over your job as president of the company, to be there to make decisions with customers or employees or operational issues or supplier issues. So I think that what's important here then is that the president needs to identify the key people that potentially are going to be taken over and be the president, particularly if they died or became disabled, and start working with them. And I really like this as a transitional way of doing it, that you try to test the waters and you don't go all in, but when you're getting closer to retirement or whatever, you go ahead and start delegating some authority so that you can enjoy life and not have to be working in the business. And I got to say, a lot of business owners, though, that doesn't work because they like to work 24/7. They're workaholics. They have no work-life balance and all that other stuff that goes with it. I believe in work-life balance. I've been doing that for years in my practice. I operate my business so that we do not have burnout in tax season. I've been through that before. Okay? So Carrie works 55 hours. I did that, and that was fine. When I went with Deloitte after the merger, they wanted you to work 70 hours. And after a month of that, you're a zombie, and you're so unproductive. You're putting in 70 hours and you get done what you did in 55, because you can't put those kind of hours in, even when I was younger. Okay. So I think it is important to try to come up with maybe a change in the organizational chart and start implementing it possibly before you're ready to sell the company. And you start identifying a strategy that would allow you as the business owner to cut back on your hours and take some travel or enjoy your family or your grandchildren. And if it does work, then it's a natural transition for you potentially, quite frankly, to not sell the company, but just allow someone to step in and run the company while you're enjoying your retirement years, that you could make that transition. Because that's one option you have as far as the succession plan. It's not to sell the company, bring somebody in to run the company, and you get the money. And that leads into the succession planning mistake number 10. The failure for the business owners to plan for their financial security, which may be dependent upon the financial success of the successor. What happens all the time typically is you're not wanting to sell the company because you can't find a cash buyer. And you're not wanting to have them owe you money because you need that money for your financial security to live out in your retirement. So what happens then? You're going to hold back. Now, what my message is if you try to plan for your personal financial security, you try to develop wealth outside the company, that's good. But I got to say, I haven't seen that much in many business owners. Okay, it's maybe a pipe dream. Okay, but what it does mean, and I will share this with you, I've gone through the analysis sometimes. When you sell the company and you pay taxes on that, a company, let's say you're making $100,000 a year, your profits in your business. Typically, that might sell for 4 or 5 times as far as a formula, just for discussion purposes. So let's say you get 5 times. You've had consistent earnings, you get $500,000. Now you got to pay capital gain tax on that. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you might have to pay $100,000, $200,000 in taxes. So how are you going to take $300,000 to $400,000 after tax and live off of that? You can't. So you're going to keep the business and earn $100,000 a year because you're earning 20% of your money, aren't you? If it's worth $500,000, if it's worth $400,000, you're earning 25% on your money. You can't replace that income. So the logical solution is to have a strategy that says, I'm going to find a key person to come in and run the company, and I'm going to ride this horse out. I had that was looking at my CPA firm merging a few years ago. And it's like, they didn't want to take any risk. If I was successful the next 3 years, they'd pay me what I had earned. I go, well, I might as well make it and then sell it down the road. And that's what I've talked to a lot of business owners about. That's really the solution, is you basically say, hey, I'm going to ride this soldier out and this horse, and I'm just going to go into the horizon, and I'm going to be involved on a part-time basis maybe. And if I'm lucky and have a good person to take over the operations of the company, and you know what you do, you pay them well and you give them a bonus based upon their productivity, the profitability of the company. It's a win-win. So I'm just trying to share with you, you have to kind of really look at the financial aspects of everything, that people say, oh, I'm going to just sell my company. And I had too many business owners at the end of the day, when you start working those numbers out and you pay taxes on whatever you get, you can't replace that income. You can't afford to retire. You look at it and it's just, the numbers don't work. So we've gone through the questions. I have tools for you, so I would encourage you, if there's certain areas that we've talked about that would be something you want to follow up on, you have some additional materials that you have some tools to work with, okay? Any questions either on succession plan and tax plan? Yes, Stan.
Well, you have pointed out in many occasions on this topic of succession plan mistakes that we need to identify who our key management person that you would want to leave your business to or run it after you retire. And I think you have also pointed out a strategy of incentivize them with bonuses. What other things can we do to make a like expect compensation plan that mutually works for the business owner and them to make them really want to take the business over.
Well, I think it's a good point because there are other things you could try to do with, if they're going to try to buy the company is another example. Okay, but the problem I have with that is, are the numbers going to work? In other words, you're making so much money in the company, and so when you're working with this person, the first thing we talked about was a bonus plan that basically says it might be a percentage of the profits. Or you might identify as in a variation of that, the company's making $100,000 now. If you can grow the company and make it $200,000, they get a bigger percentage. It's a win-win. They might get a third. So what I'm trying to suggest is, what I found from a client a long time ago, this actually is a contractor. He had a guy working with him for 35 years. He said, you know, Bill, I pay him well. You pay him well, and you'll get the results. I also found that out, too, because when I've worked with different people, that sometimes people will, if they think that they're being paid 90% of what they should be paid, they're going to give you 90% of the effort. Okay? So I think part of the solution is, number one, I think you got to pay them well out of the box and expect a lot out of them to make sure that they're delivering, because it's you know, you got to try to make sure that you support them so that they are successful. But it's a collaborative effort as far as what the business plan is. You work with them so that you don't tie their hands and they try to do things. Then you're the business owner saying no, 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 no. So it's a lose-lose. You know, you're trying to make things happen. The other thing I got to tell you that, quite frankly, sometimes that's not the solution, is to have a key person. And the solution sometimes is you ride it out as long as you can, and you know that the management buyout doesn't work. That sometimes it's a competitor that's the best solution for that problem. So you find another company that's a competitor of yours that would potentially be interested in expanding their business and I have a client doing that right now. He's got a lot of debt. He's got a business segment. He's going to sell that business segment to the competitor so he can pay down his debt. But he's going to continue operating this other company. So it's kind of a solution sometimes. That's your best deal, quite frankly. If you can sell out to a public company, that would be another example too. They usually would pay a higher multiple of earnings, 6, 7, 8 times. When Square Food Service sold out, public company, public information I'm sharing with you, sold out at 9 times their earnings. Okay? So it's not an easy answer, I got to tell you, with working with a key person, that may or may not work. But if you have a key person, you can come up with different ways of compensating them. You can also have what's called some type of stock option plan, an incentive stock option plan. So that's a way that's, to me, not a succession plan, but it does reward an employee to help grow the company. We have another thing called a phantom stock plan. You don't give them stock in the company, but you say, look, if the company's successful, right now the company's worth, let's say, $500,000. If you grow the company down the road and I sell it for $1 million, I'm going to give you a bonus equal to whatever percentage you give them, 5% a year, up to 25%. So it's an incentive plan. It's a bonus plan. That's another important issue, because if they're a minority shareholder, you can't fire them unless you have cause. So you got to be careful if you're a business owner, given a minority owner, key person, ownership in the company. You may have a hard time terminating their services unless you have cause under state law, Ohio and Kentucky. But the phantom stock plan is another option that incentivizes them to increase the value of the company. It's a win-win. And it's a bonus plan that you define in a contract. If the company is sold, okay, that they get a bonus equal to that price. Okay, so I do have a couple clients that have done what we call phantom stock plans. There's nothing called incentive stock options. To me, that's just a bonus plan. That's not a succession plan, but they have the option to buy the stock at a period of time at a certain price, and so they end up getting basically, in essence, a bonus based upon how the value of the stock is increased over a 5 or 10 year period with an incentive stock option. So, I mean, there are different types of tax plans that are out there that have that give you the ability to get a tax deduction for the money you pay them based upon how the value of the company grows. Okay? So that's how you can tie it into the actual value of the company, but then you got to value the company. You got to come up with a formula for that. Okay? So we'll be talking about that in the estate planning area under a buy-sell agreement, if they actually do have other shareholders. Yes, Ella?
Bill, what about, you had talked about if you bring in a third party to run the company for you, in the interim, how do you protect your proprietary information in case it doesn't work out with that third party?
That's a very good question. You should have a comprehensive non-competition agreement, non-disclosure agreement. You know, you just load it up that they're not going to take your employees, they're not going to use your information, your confidential information, and they're not going to compete with you. So if you do bring a key person in that capacity, I didn't mention that, you would have a contract with that key person that upon termination of employment, they can't go out and compete. They can't, that is enforceable, but usually it's only for a year, I got to tell you. So you got to be very careful when you make this decision. But, you know, the other point I would make is that as it relates to employees and as it relates to confidential information, the use of confidential information can extend beyond a year. They can compete, but they can't use your systems and trade secrets and that kind of thing. So that's how you try to protect yourself when you bring a key person in. You should do that, yes. I think we're ready for a break now. We will take questions at the end of the last session, but thank you. We'll get back for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you.